welcome to the next edition of the Value Exchange podcast. I'm Annabelle Lambert, and as usual, I'm here with my co-host Rob Pye. Say hello, Rob Pye.
Good afternoon, Annabelle. Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Really excited today to be with Rachel Sosin, who, declaring all up front, we have only just met really to talk to in the last quarter of an hour. But Rachel and I had a little exchange on LinkedIn with regards to people and how people really are everything and how they should be changing the world for better by just shifting their mind a bit, because everybody can if they really, really want to do that. But from what minimal amount of information that I have read on Rachel, and I'm keeping it this short, is that I know that she's looking to improve the lives of people. So I am a total supporter of that, and really excited to hear more about Rachel. So Rachel, tell us about who you are, what you're about, and anything you want to share.
Sure. Well, I think, improve the lives of people feels like baseline. So it feels like it's something that is easy to say, easy to go for, and really hard to miss the mark on. So, it's just sort of a matter of managing expectations there.
Set yourself up for failure.
Yep. Always under promise and over deliver is my goal. Yes, so we just met, although we connected on LinkedIn, which I think is actually probably a decent indicator of who I am. I really enjoy talking to strangers. It makes some people crazy, I think. But I really enjoy talking to strangers, especially if it is around kind of a complex issue or a kind of a wicked challenge, and not in the sense that I want to argue, but in the sense that I think that there are often lots of ways to see situations, and in those kinds of conversations, I think always really intrigue me. I think I'm one of sort of the tenets of my life is that collaboration will always lead to better results than competition.
Nice.
And so those are the sorts of conversations that I seek out. So Annabelle had posted something on LinkedIn, and it just really struck me as kind of a, one piece of the puzzle. And so we had this great little conversation about it. But that doesn't necessarily tell you about, sort of the mechanics of me. So I'll give you some of that background. So as you may be able to tell from my accent, I am actually from the United States.
Oh, really?
And I know I have a strong Cockney accent. My parents were from Philadelphia, super liberal, super hippie. And but my dad ended up working in computer science essentially in the defense industry. So we ended up moving to Virginia outside of Washington, D.C., where we lived in the country on a small farm. And my parents were very concerned that I would become, sort of that I would lose the benefits of being in a big city with lots of culture and things like that. So growing up, the magazines that we were subscribed to were things like the New Republic, the New Yorker, the New York Times every Sunday morning, and now that we have the gardeners out back. So sorry if you can hear that. Fantastic. And we went into DC all of the time for the museum. So I was spoiled and grew up on free museums, which then meant that when I would go to some other cities, it was a bit of a shock. And grew up with a strong family focus on things like social justice, questioning the norms, wanting to understand, particularly living in the South of the United States, why some of the things we were being taught might not necessarily match with what had actually happened historically, things like that. And so I think I grew up with a very curious approach to life and a very strong sense of fighting for what's right. I remember going and marching in one of the big AIDS walks with my mom. Was like my first kind of big social action. I from pretty early age had a good understanding of Roe versus Wade and abortion rights. And that definitely carried through into adulthood. And so I went to university straight out of high school.
So quick interruption, Rachel. Do you put that down, if you look at yourself, to nature or nurture? Very eloquent, description. Did you learn it because your parents? Was it in there? Is there, what is there? If you were to strip out the bits that are sort of you think are innate, are in there. Is the social justice bit, something you think is wired in your DNA that would have been there without the museums?
I mean, I think that's a hard one to look at, right? Because because it is who I am.
You didn't come on the show to get easy questions.
I'm going to ask you what your favorite color is in a minute. So,
so I think I don't know that you could have grown up in my household without coming out this way. But I also maybe that is nature. I don't know. I mean, I certainly, if you look at my entire family, to the aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents, I do think that we are a family that sort of sits fairly close to each other on the ideological spectrum. Right. But certainly that's not the case for a lot of families. So I don't know. I'm going to say both and neither.
Good.
On that. And so I went to university at the age that everyone goes to university in the US, and having no idea what I wanted to do, kind of bouncing around. And so my career took me down sort of a winding route that didn't really make sense at the time, but in hindsight, I realized very much the thread of it was being really interested in people, and what makes them tick, and also being a little bit of a magpie for experiences and connections and knowledge. And so being able to really kind of connect the dots between this person over here and that project over there, and that sort of thing. And I think now, having learned a little bit more about how people work in organizational design and things like that, I realized that actually I'm a generalist, and I had no idea for most of my adult life. And so at a certain point, I decided to finally finish a bachelor's degree, which I am pleased to report I finished a month before turning 40, which was also about 2 months into COVID. And so a friend said, "Well, when are you going to do grad school?" And I said, "Well, in the United States, that is very expensive. And so unless my employer is paying for it, I'm probably not." And she, being an Englishwoman, sort of jokingly said, "Well, why don't you come to the UK then?" And I said, "Haha, you're so funny." And then I started looking, and interestingly enough, I found a program that was exactly what I wanted, and it was cheaper for me to pick up and leave the Midwest of the United States and move to London for a year, and get a graduate degree than to stay in the United States and get the only similar program that I could find. Would have required moving to a city that I wasn't interested in moving to, and would have cost, I think it was like 4 times as much. It was just ridiculous. So I moved to London. And it was actually, I actually arrived 2 years ago tomorrow. And so I came for a interdisciplinary course in social innovation. So I was in a very small cohort with service designers and luxury brand management, communication design, and illustration. And within the social innovation course, my background's sort of organizational design, I guess I would say. And I was working with a fashion designer and an industrial designer, and got to work with illustrators and all sorts of just fascinating people. Changed the way I think, changed the way I view my own work, also completely changed where I thought I wanted to go when I was done with the course. Um, and so I decided to stay here in London. And I once I graduated, I think I was just sort of decided to say, I'm just going to say yes to everything, and within reason. And so I realized I was in a new country and didn't really know that many people. So I needed to get out and meet as many people as I could. And I needed to, I'm not sure I needed to, but I really enjoy learning. And so I just wanted to kind of take any learning opportunity I could. And so I started just having agendaless coffees with people and just seeing where that went. And then I was talking to someone
That
about how,
sounds like a very formal way to be informal, doesn't it? I would
yeah,
like to have an agendaless coffee with you. It's like, oh,
well, it
I,
started out as random coffee, and I felt like that people weren't really
yeah,
sure
it's a
what
bit
to do with it.
destined to go nowhere. But an agendaless coffee, now you're talking. Yeah,
Well, and I think agendaless helps people, particularly when a stranger comes to you and says, I don't know you from Adam, but you sound interesting. Can we meet?
yeah.
You're a busy person. You sit there and you think, "Ugh, what's this person want from me?" So it was being able to say agendaless was a great way of saying, I'm not
There's
really going
also
to
a
ask you
pun.
for anything.
There's a pun on that, of course, as well, isn't there? Genderless, genderless. You'd be non-binary, and you'd be happy to go to your genderless coffee.
I think
Yeah.
I use, can we just have an exploration is the word I use quite often. But
Yeah.
that's just, just no end necessary. Nothing might happen, but let's just explore.
Yeah. And so I just had all of these incredible conversations with people, and it made me realize different things about sort of what, how I saw myself, how, I think one of the things that I learned that was really valuable was that I think as people, we tend to undervalue the things that come easily to us. So if you ask me what I'm good at, I'm going to tell you the things that I've had to work really hard to become good at. But if you ask my friends what I'm good at, they're going to tell you the things that I sort of write off as, well, that's just who I am. And so having these
And then
conversations.
there are certain things where we universally overestimate our abilities, like being a good driver, for example. We're all good drivers, aren't they? It's his problem, her problem, their problem.
I'm a fantastic driver. Um, I also refuse to drive in this country.
Don't go to Italy. Don't, if you're not driving here, don't go to Italy.
Well, at least in Italy, they drive on the side of the road that I am
Oh, the
familiar
same
with.
side. I know, but it's madness there.
Yeah.
Apology
And
to all the Italians. Sorry, my personal
Um,
experience.
but yeah, so I think that those were sort of some of the things that I started realizing, and I started realizing I just really love just talking to people who I don't know. And but and the irony to me now sitting here on this side of the screen is that I'm not particularly interested in talking about myself and much more interested in talking to other people. So, one of the things that grew out of the agendaless coffees was that I started a podcast, and where I just get to talk to people who are doing really cool stuff and ask them about their cool stuff. So it's called 6 Degrees of Innovation, and I just said essentially they're usually entrepreneurs of some kind, and working on really interesting things that are usually focused on. So far, there's been a lot of stuff around education, and just kind of around human experience, I guess I would say, sort of very, very broadly. And it's great fun, and it means that I get to talk to lots of people, and I don't have to talk about myself. And so now I find myself here on your show, where you've asked me to talk about me.
So
I think universally people kind of don't, start off. I think I said before the show, don't like to until you can get them comfortable in some, what they love. So we're going to get on to organizational design and helping people, and then hopefully have a magic moment where the energy level goes from I did that and I did that, and because it always happens, because there is always something that will spark the energy in someone for them to be driven totally intrinsically into a subject they love. But actually, when you can mix that with who people really are, as opposed to a role they occupy. I am a policeman, I am a general, I am a chief exec. Well, okay, great. Who are you? And what do you care about? What are you passionate about? So, Annabelle, I interrupted because I'm good at
sorry,
that.
I was just going to ask a question. So Rachel, you said that you went on this course and you were in a small group, and there was a variety of people, many in the design space, but in different elements of design. You said it totally changed the way you thought about things, and I'm just interested to understand what changed, what happened.
So I think essentially I had never thought of myself as any kind of designer. And I had never thought of, which is a little ironic since I signed up for a Master of Design course specifically because I wanted something that would have that focus. But I my background had been in fundraising, in developing teams, in process improvement and management and things like that, and which is not something that previously I ever would have thought of in any kind of designerly way. And so working with people who were very visually focused really helped me then kind of shift the way I saw the work that I had been doing. And I think this also goes to the notion of, you don't necessarily value the things that come easily. One of the things that I have always been good at is helping people sort of see their potential and where they could be, where they could really be putting their energy in, usually in a kind of a professional environment. And being able to start to sort of see that in a bit of a more strategic way, as opposed to just sort of understanding it as, a thing that I do, I think was really helpful. And then I also just started to really understand the value of like design methodologies and then also kind of aesthetic in your work. And so I think thinking about the aesthetic of a workshop, or the aesthetic of even my CV, really was just something that I had never really paid much attention to before. And that really shifted for me. And I think I also started to think about research in a different way. So one of the projects that I did was I collaborated with an illustrator, and we were exploring imposter syndrome, which is something that I'm really, really fascinated by. And so what we would do is we would interview women who were largely British and European, I think between the ages of maybe like 28 and 50, I think was about our range. So we were kind of going for like professional experience, having enough experience to sort of be like objectively deemed successful. And so while we would do the interview, my colleague would draw what they were describing, and the outcome of that was just really incredible. And that is a type of research that never would have occurred to me previously. In the past, it would have been like, I do interviews and then I write a report. And
We've
this
been
was much
involved
more valuable.
in quite a few collaborations over the years. I mean, going back 20 or so years, where you get a visual artist to take an entire stadium wall, 6 foot or along, and then just describe visually, what was the stories that were being told, and that remains a hugely sort of engaging visual art part of particular workshops. I wonder. Did the course or your experience talk to other aspects of design other than visual, or was it very visual? Was the course very, very visual focused? And
Um,
how, on getting on that course, the sort of side question: are you innately? Are you good with a pencil? Are you a good artist? Is that because I mean somebody I put myself as a designer, but not with a pencil, not with a paintbrush, not with a give me a line of code or an architecture of processes. I'll design away forever. I rate myself in that. I love it, but not with a not visually, not.
I with a pen and pencil, I'm much more of a sort of a doodler, but I do have I'm a big crafter. I knit, I do this year I've started doing a little bit of visible mending. And I am really interested in pretty much anything that is textile based. If I had the space and the means, then I would absolutely love to do pottery. So I think I'm probably more of a uh, things that are three-dimensional. And then in terms of design in the course, yes, I think but I think the visual aspect of design, I think, was what struck me as sort of the most surprising. The things that I knew that we were going to be learning were design thinking, service design, and those sorts of things, which were incredibly beneficial and valuable. But I sort of knew that that's what I was going to be getting. So I think when I say the program really changed the way I was thinking, it was mainly because it was sort of the unexpected.
Yeah.
And I think the other piece that really shifted for me was realizing I use can I use a curse word?
Yes.
Okay. So I used to sort of say that I was a master bullshitter. And one of the things that but in a kind of a positive way, as an example, I was a bridesmaid in a friend's wedding, and then at the reception she said, I forgot to have anyone do a toast. Can you do the toast in like 5 minutes? And I did. And so that sort of kind of on the spot thing has been something that I'm good at. And so some of my classmates who are much kinder than me eh, were helped me kind of reframe it as I am a great synthesizer. So I am probably not going to be the person who is going to develop a life-changing technology. For one thing, I generally don't have any kind of technical skills. But I can be the person who helps you translate your technology into something that lay people can understand, or in a group conversation where lots of people are saying lots of different but related things. I will be the one who can find the thread through all of it. So I sort of joke that I don't necessarily have any new ideas, but I can tell you your ideas quite well.
Yeah, that we call that management consultancy in the UK.
With the classic line,
give
me a
give
go
me
and
a
do
watch and I'll tell you the time.
So yeah.
So how is this manifesting, this design, this thinking in lifting people up and helping people? What would you, how would you like to use it to make a change? What change do you want to see, and how are you going to feature in that film, metaphorically?
Sure. The short answer is I don't know. The long answer is I think there are a lot of irons in the fire, or whatever that phrase is.
Very British. Well, yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
And I think that it comes down to the skills and the interests in helping other people really manifest, not necessarily in a woo-woo way, but sort of manifest what it is that they are going after, and being able to verbalize what it is that they're going after. So I do a lot of very unofficial work with people around sort of, how do I navigate this challenge at work? Or I'm considering this life change. What does that look like? And just sort of being a sounding board. And so one of the things that I have always tried to do is surround myself with people who are smarter and more interesting than me. And then my value add to the relationship is that I'm the sounding board. And I think that kind of comes back to the piece of being able to be a little bit of a magpie and picking up what they're saying, but also, what they're doing, and also what other things I have recently read about or heard about or seen, and kind of being able to make those connections and introducing people who are doing similar things to each other and could have mutually beneficial relationships. So I think I would say that ultimately I try to be a step stool for people in getting to be their best selves. That sounds really gross.
No, I mean, let's take a short commercial break to thank our sponsors, Ethos. We're here, and the interesting part of this podcast, one of many interesting bits, of course, is to make it individual centric, and the whole work system we've developed the last 15 years, 23 years, however long, is for people to make that transition by being comfortable with telling their story. It's kind of, that's sort of a little bit where we are at the moment, the conclusion, and therefore you get people, however reluctant they are at telling their own story, it is always that story that's going to make the difference. So if you're helping people be their best self by helping them out that story, it's really great when you've got a story to tell, however much that is not externalized, because you engage in a really authentic way by having knowledge of that story. So maybe you can just shut up and listen, and then play back, because if what you're doing is playing a process or someone else's record, people see that's not authentic. You're not really talking. And so we had a philosopher on the show yesterday, and he was like, one of my best skills is just sitting there and saying nothing. And then he felt the need to, sorry, Pranay, shout out for you. Yes, he felt the need then to go, yeah, but I've got lots of skills and experience. I know lots of stuff about. I know, and it's almost like I'm good at saying nothing because I actually got all this stuff behind me. And I think that was one of the great paradoxes, really, isn't it? It's like sometimes if the more we know, maybe the less we need to say.
Mm-hmm.
But that this is an opportunity to kind of just get whoever you are, and that's what value exchange is. Just start from the stories, and rather
Mm-hmm.
than somebody else's. You're not telling your own story, you're parroting somebody else's story, and that may be a problem we're here to solve when it comes to lifting people up.
I think something you were just saying in there struck me, particularly knowing that at one point you were at EY, because
I've done PwC as well.
No.
So, I think one of the things that design thinking has maybe sort of been misrepresented in the business world is that, it is this extremely formulaic process. It is the double diamond, and you do this and then 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 the end. And in fact, it's a guideline. And I think that is, when I think about any kind of consulting or any kind of helping other people figure out where they're going, whether that is on a personal level or a professional level or developing a product or anything, being able to say, I have sort of a sense of A to B, but what happens in between could go in any direction. I think that was another thing that set my program apart from other more traditional academic programs, because when you're working with a whole bunch of people who work in the visual arts and in creative arts, that middle mess is the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that also has been really important, and just knowing what the double diamond looks like and being able to say, I don't care about it. Not that I don't care about it, but being able to say, like, I know enough to know where its strengths and weaknesses are, I think becomes really, really helpful in helping other people navigate their path. And so much like the philosopher who could say, I know all sorts of stuff, but I'm really valuable when I'm simply sitting and listening. I think that there is an element of, the more you know, the easier it is to be comfortable doing nothing, and having doing nothing be the doing. So yeah.
Wonderful.
And there is a great title.
I think actually, I'll credit where credit is due. I am pretty sure that the doing nothing is doing, I think, is a
something.
I got that basically. He said it more eloquently, I think, but a man named Johnny Moore, who wrote a book called Unhurried and recently published Unhurried at Work. But I think that it actually came from him. So
fair enough.
So
fair enough. Credit.
Where next? What's your ideal project? What is the does it involve technology? Does it involve designing customer experiences? Does it, and how can we help lift people up in such a consumer oriented, economically dominated, extractive planet? And then Annabelle can ask you what your favorite color is. What's the ideal project?
That will be the moment that takes us over the edge when I ask that question.
I think the that's a tough one. So broadly speaking, not necessarily my next step. But broadly speaking, I read the book Ministry of the Future
Okay.
by Kim Stanley Robinson earlier this year. And I can't stop thinking about it and how it feels like there are certain elements that really should be our next steps. And so if you haven't read the book, do.
It's been
Um,
recommended to us. I
I
haven't read it yet.
I think I might have even read it actually in 2022, and I still genuinely think about it at least 3 or 4 times a week and recommend it to someone probably once every 2 weeks.
I haven't read it. I think I've heard of it. But I
We
haven't
have
read
had it recommended by John. Husband recommended it to us when we spoke
Okay.
with him.
Okay.
But
You really
yeah.
should. But the premise is essentially there is a cataclysmic climate
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
incident,
Yeah.
and the world is forced into action. And some of those actions that are taken, well, I don't know how to say it. There are lots of different actions that are taken, and some have clear benefits, and some don't. And but I think about that a lot, and I think about the I really think we're at a moment where major change is needed, and I don't have any solutions there, but I think it's needed.
No,
And
Top down, bottom up, middle out. What's the sort of, are you sort of,
I
are
think
you top
it's
down policy? You bottom up activist? Are you middle out process? What's the sort of
I
what
think it's
what
I
bits
think it's
of that?
all of the above. And this actually gets a little bit to the conversation that Annabelle and I were having on LinkedIn. So I think that absolutely people are at the center of all decision making. That is obvious. Decisions are made by people. There are also a lot of people who, in their positions of corporateness, make decisions that are very different from the decisions they make as people. And I know corporateness isn't a real word, but that's the like the
It is
that's the
now.
best thing I can I can say. There's that disconnect between what I do as an individual and what I do as the the head of X
Coca-Cola.
organization.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I do think that it is about people making decisions to change, but I also think that um, the emphasis needs to be on those corporate decisions, and whether that is through regulation or whether that is through shareholder demand. Um, but I think that we are in a place where change has to come both by force in the form of regulation and by consumer demand. And I think if you look at things like uh, the Earth Overshoot Day this year was August 2nd, I think, meaning we had already used up all of the natural resources that the Earth was going to be able to replenish in a year. And so that's barely more than half the year. And we're now working in a deficit. And if you were thinking about that in terms of financials, if I'm paid once a month and by the 18th I've spent all my money, that's a real problem.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that's what we're doing, and those are the sorts of things that, as much as I can decide that I'm never going to fly on holiday ever again, but it doesn't change the fact that in 2022 private jets had more carbon emissions than the entire country of Uganda. So what I am doing is really not going to have a significant impact on an individual level. What I am doing and what I am demanding of my politicians, what I am demanding of of those corporate CEOs may make a difference, but so I'm certainly not saying that the individual is worthless and should therefore do whatever they want. But I think I think a lot about how the whole notion of the carbon footprint was developed so that corporates wouldn't have to acknowledge the damage that they were doing. I think it was BP came up with the carbon footprint as a way to say, like, it's not really our problem. Think about, what you're doing as an individual. And I think that those are the sorts of things where, individuals are operating and making decisions that are in the best interest of their corporation, but not in the best interest of them as individuals and not in the best interest of people as a whole. So, all of that to say, I think it has to come from the top and the bottom, which is really sort of the same, because it's people making decisions to do things differently, and it is people making huge policy, whether that's government policy or corporate policy, decisions that are more in line with who they are as people. And I think a great example of that is if you look to the United States and you look to gun regulation, something like 98% of Americans think there should be stronger gun regulations. And yet, the politicians, and one would think if 98% of Americans think that probably somewhere close to 98% of the politicians think that too. Like, one would think maybe. And yet it's impossible to do. And so I think I don't know what the answer is to get those people to make the decisions on the large scale that match the decisions that they would make in their own personal life. But I think that's what we need.
Do you think that in that top-down part of the equation, because there's a couple of things you said there, I just want to come back to briefly. I think very insightful. But in whether it's individuals or nation states, organizations, NGOs, do you think there should be limits to power? Do you think that we could just have one organization that runs the world and we'd all be fine? Because we're kind of, we're not quite there yet, but it seems like we're getting there.
I mean, I think Elon Musk is trying to test it out.
As long as it's me, we'll be fine.
Because you're a great driver.
I'm putting myself up there for that. I'm a great.
The laughing party.
I think that when you look at communities like are you familiar with the kibbutz movement in Israel?
We are, but for people that aren't, then yeah. Far away.
This was, and I guess it was, I think it existed in different forms kind of around the world, but in particular in the middle of the 20th century, there was this movement to develop these sort of like utopian agricultural communities. And they were, they were essentially very, very small communist communities. And a lot of them worked really well until they got too big. And then capitalism seeped in. Kinds of community-driven communities work really well on a small scale. And then there's a tipping point where they break down. And so that's what I think of when you say, like, could there be one big organization that runs the world? Like, I don't think so, because I think it's not scalable. I think hyper-local is phenomenal. And I think COVID was one of the things that taught us about the value of hyper-local community and hyper-local development, and also the dangers of globalism, like high supply chain. So I think, but the challenge with hyperlocal is it can't grow in the way that we are used to growing things. So if you want to replicate hyperlocal, you have to on some level reinvent it each time. And I think we as sort of a global society just don't have the appetite for that. Like we want to be able to franchise and or we want to be able to conglomerate. And I don't think that those um I don't think those work to a full global level. I'm not actually sure if
Yeah,
that answered your question.
well, I mean, my question was about moderating the power of individuals or organizations, institutions who were absolutely enormous. You know, again, you mentioned Elon Musk. You know, I could mention the President of the United States. You know, there's a guy, you know, at the moment and previously, heaven help us, you know, who I'd really like to not come to power again. And the sort of muscle that the US president has with the US dollar behind them, you
Mhm.
know, global reserve currency,
Mhm.
or Elon Musk or Vladimir Putin for that matter, you know,
Mhm.
is there a necessary moderating force? Maybe that's democracy that says, well, how much is enough? Do we just let it go endless? You know, because it seems to be going in a certain direction at the moment. It doesn't end well, you know. So
No. Um, I think, I think absolute power corrupts. Um, and the challenge is what's the check? Um, so if particularly using the examples that we have just used, what is the next bigger thing? Um, and so,
or the next smaller thing. Sorry to interrupt, but you know, maybe what's the next smaller thing? Because you know, somewhere between a kibbutz and a transnational, you know, global power, you know, might be something sustainable. So, you know,
yeah,
where might we compete with each other for less? You know, I really aspire to your secondhand clothes, your secondhand car, your lack of interest in traveling the world or whatever. But we tend to have this unlimited growth mindset um, played upon us with our economic system that says, you
yeah.
know, growth is good, growth is good. Well, growth and extraction is not going very well at the moment, is it? You know, there's some things that are not going well, and when we want to think differently, maybe you know we compete for less in some areas.
I think
Carbon footprint, you know, whatever.
Yeah, compete
absolutely.
for less, but think bigger. I mean, I think the challenge, of course, with being local, local, local is we all go, oh, we're going to be local.
Yeah,
And then we don't
yeah,
care about anybody over there anymore, which is the problem with nation states, isn't it? Which is like,
Yeah.
we don't care what's going on in sub-Saharan Africa because we're not there and it's got nothing to do with us. Like, should I have a vote in the, in the election for the United States president? I
we
feel I
think we
should.
should. We
It's
we
going to
think
affect
we
me.
should
Yeah,
have a
yeah.
vote.
So
We
it's,
this
it's,
affects us
it's a
very
wicked
personally,
problem.
by the way. You know.
Yeah.
It's
it's a
true. It's
it's a wicked
true.
problem. But I'm just coming back to the Ministry of Future, Rachel. It is. I've been having the thought recently because I've got quite a few things in my head. I just want to get on a piece of paper. But it is. I feel like we consume science fiction a lot, and then it becomes the future.
Mhm.
And we take the best of science fiction, which doesn't come from scientists. It comes from wonderfully creative, imaginative people. Or and they might be scientifically bent, or they might not. But whatever. But we have this science. So I feel I want a lot more social fiction. I want a lot more ideas. A lot more. What could happen. So I'm desperate now to read Ministry of the Future because I'm aching for solutions. Because it's impossible. I can think of loads of things that you could do, but there's a challenge with everything that you consider, even if are as extreme and boundaryless as I can be. But I'm not the wildest, I'm sure, in the world, but it's I want more social fiction, is what I've called it.
Yeah.
I'm calling it social fiction.
Well, what I loved about the book is it's actually very well researched scientifically. So you will read it, and there will be a lot of things that you say, "Wait a minute, I've been reading about that in the papers," but it's also very much about people. To the idea of degrowth, I think that it is. I think about it a lot. I think that it probably is our best path forward. I don't know how we shift the needle to make it the norm. And, I think that loosely related, I have always kind of struggled with the idea of the B Corp model, because I think companies that are certified B Corps are fantastic, but I also worry that if being a B Corp is a special thing that some companies go after, then it makes it harder to make those benchmarks the norm across business.
And
And
just for listeners who have no idea what you're talking
yeah.
about, maybe you just give a quick pencil sketch of degrowth and B Corp.
So B Corp is a there is an organization that will essentially certify a business to demonstrate that they have met a variety of benchmarks around sustainability, both in terms of environmental sustainability, but also sustainable practices in terms of people, and so hitting the 3 Ps of people, planet, profits, and so they tend to be mission-driven businesses. They tend to be companies that have, sort of an ethos and a culture of doing good, which is great. And I want companies to be doing good. What I think about a lot is, how do we get the companies who aren't mission-driven, which isn't, not all companies need to be mission-driven, but how do we get the non-mission-driven companies to also think about people and planet, because ultimately that will help their profit. Now, sort of perhaps conflicting that, degrowth is the idea of focusing on, I think I might get this wrong.
That's more of a political movement that says,
yeah, that
growth in all areas is not necessarily a good thing. Maybe we should actually plan to scale down on fossil fuel extraction and some of those things. So it's more, B Corp is the certification, and degrowth is a pseudo political movement, because it's not, you can't actually vote for the degrowth party, but it's a set of
right.
ideas that say we should do less of some things.
And
So,
I think so. The sort of the tension between, do we want degrowth or do we want green growth, I think is very interesting, because, and frankly, I think that there's like so many situations there, you can see them from many, many different angles, and all be right, and maybe also all be wrong. But so if degrowth is sort of focusing on sort of like, how do we reduce, how do we continue to have people benefit and planet benefit while kind of seeing a new model, then green growth is sort of a little bit of a kind of like, how do we continue the financial growth, but with a little bit more of a green mindset. And I think in some ways that feels a little bit more palatable to a lot of people, because it doesn't feel like such a difference. But it's really hard to convince a large corporate that they should stop worrying so much about increasing profits and should start thinking about increasing other metrics. And I think in some ways green growth feels like it's like an easier step for people to say, like, okay, well, I'm still going to grow my profits, but I'm also going to think about doing things a little more sustainably or something. And I don't know that it gets us any closer to net zero, but I think that those are interesting sort of like economic philosophies that are all part of this conversation of what does
I think
surviving look like.
Yeah.
you make so many inspiring and wonderful, lovely points you've made, Rachel. I'm going to think about one of them a lot more, which is, as a chief executive of a company, they're human beings. How can we make those big decisions? Firstly, as humans, as whole people, and then secondly, as artifacts of a corporation who happen to have roles. Or I read a very inspiring story along those lines of two types of chief exec who were downsizing and losing half the people in their organization. And the one chief exec, it was a disembodied decision. It was, well, okay, right, great. Another one, it was a nervous breakdown almost. It was such a painful decision where they knew that this was the life of hundreds of, thousands of people who would no longer be able to work in that environment anymore. And that was, a life changing moment for that person.
Mm-hmm.
In all the right and wrong ways, and the learning and the pain so when we're doing this thing of social and environmental value, people and planet, one of the things we're broadcasting and talking about most is feel it, engage it with it emotionally, personally, because
Mm-hmm.
when you can do it from a first person, then it doesn't seem so difficult to think about why you wouldn't want a dolphin to ingest your plastic bottle, why you would want to spend more time in nature, and green spaces, and just go somewhere where you're actually in the natural world, not in the and if you can make it, helping your brothers, sisters, friends, work colleagues, supporting others and being supported by others, and if you can feel it viscerally in the first person, job done. And actually, it's simple to say. It's the most
Really
difficult
difficult.
thing. So if you could
But all the
live
points you made
every
earlier.
day of your life in work through your own personal experiences rather than disembodied, I think we'd get somewhere really quickly. So
Absolutely.
that's
I
such.
think,
Thank you for sharing that point.
yeah, I think that there's, I spent so much of my life thinking of, professional Rachel and personal Rachel. And I think the
Stop that.
moment
Stop
that
that.
I decided that, like, it's part and parcel of the same thing, um, it was incredibly liberating. And I think also makes me better at my job, because I am not trying to code switch in any way. I am just simply me, and that's what you're
And
going to
better
get.
outside of work as
Yeah.
well. Better as a
And
yeah.
interestingly, it makes it easier to actually shut work off,
Mm-hmm.
which I would not expect, but I do feel like by being my whole self all the time, it is a little easier for me to walk away
No
at the end of
no
the day.
barriers that say,
Mhm.
okay, no, I'm not at work anymore. I'm not the work Rachel. I'm this, I'm
Yeah.
that, I'm that. And it, in this world of hypermedia, it does drive us mad, doesn't it? This sort of. Sorry,
Yeah.
Annabelle, back to you.
Yeah, no, fantastic. We are 59 minutes in, so we've overrun massively, which I was sort of thought we would anyway.
After editing.
Yeah. It'll be 59 minutes and 1 second, maybe. No, but it's all good. But I guess just to say thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, Rachel,
Rob,
what a wonderful contribution you've made. Thank you. Really enjoyed
Thank
that.
you.
I'd really
How
like
was
to
that for
Very much.
you?
continue the
Did you enjoy it?
conversation as well. Yeah.
This was great. This was really fun.
Yeah, despite the
I
fact you don't like talking about Rachel, we did quite a good job, didn't we? Didn't we?
It's
Send
true.
your
It's true.
friends to the show. Let's talk to everyone you know. Please send them here.
I will.
After
I
they've been
actually
on
have a
your
few
show.
people who I have a few people who I'm gonna send you an email about when we hang up. So
We
yeah.
better say goodbye then. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
okay.
Bye for now. Until the next show.
Bye.
Thank you.